Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the delay. This is the What Just Happened panel. We're really excited to kick off a new series of panels today called What Just Happened. The idea is every month we're going to get the VCU community together and a panel of experts to focus on something really relevant in y'all's lives. So it could be anything from pop culture to current events to the political scene to the British Royals. I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in a month, but we'll decide in the middle of each month what the panel's on and let everybody know. Today, I'm super excited to kick off the What Just Happened panel with What Just Happened Sneaker Madness. So the sneaker game is really blowing up with the direct-to-consumer market. It's been in the news a lot, so we're kicking off the panel today with three awesome VCU alumni. So excited to get started with everyone. Our first guest is Mark Cheatham. Most people call him Cheats. He's a 2005 graduate of VCU from the School of Social Work. Mark is the creator and founder of the Cheats movement. Voted one of the best independent media platforms in Richmond. The Cheats movement celebrates the Richmond region as a hub for music, art, culture, and diversity. In 2018, Mark transformed his popular podcast into a radio show, which aired bi-weekly on WRIR 97.3 FM. It's on hiatus, which I'm guessing is a pandemic thing. So hopefully you can check him out there again. Professionally, Mark serves as the director of constituent services and casework for Senator Tim Kaine. He's married to Aria Cheatham. And together they have a 6-year-old son named Cameron. So maybe we'll get into Cameron's sneaker game if he's got a good collection.
He's doing better than me. I'll tell you what, he's starting early.
Awesome. You gotta start him early. Our next panelist is Warren Satchel. Warren is a 2000 graduate of the VCU School of the Arts, specifically the Department of Fashion Design and Merchandising. He is a fashion industry professional with more than 15 years of experience and has touched some of the world's biggest brands, including Amazon Fashion, Perry Ellis, Kenneth Cole, Gap, and Giorgio Armani. Warren currently resides in New York City, and he's a first-year member of our VCU Alumni Board of Governors. So super happy to have Warren here as well. The last panelist is Kevin Bailey. Kevin is a 2004 graduate of VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture. He was notoriously known on campus, apparently, for his sneaker game, as he had jobs at Finish Line and Foot Locker at the same time. Willow Lawn and Virginia Center Commons. So for our local folks, you know those malls aren't close together. I was a Regency Square guy, but Kevin later branched into numerous opportunities within the sneaker culture, most notably as the managing editor and a consultant for Soul Collector magazines during its launch in the early 2000s. He was also an active voice on NikeTalk.com for more than 2 decades. Professionally, Kevin serves as a admissions specialist for the VCU School of Nursing and has recently signed 3 separate deals in 2021 to keep him active and present in the sneaker community for decades to come. So these are our 3 panels. Thank you for joining us today. Kevin, I have to ask to start off with the Finish Line Foot Locker thing. Did you ever wear like the uniform, the referee's uniform to the wrong place, or did that ever happen?
I'm too anal for that. I would just say there was certain times I would go from what was then the Commons area to Franklin and so forth, and having to switch Batman. So people had known me wearing a referee uniform going up Gray Street, and then you see me on Franklin, I'm wearing the khaki and the blue. So just what it was. And to this day, there's some DMs that are still to come today, like, how did you get fired? Like, why did we catch that? Like, so it's but that was known. I was had one uniform on or the other, definitely.
That's great. Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys being here. Really, I just want to start off with to kind of learn about y'all's sneakers journey, like what kind of made you fall in love with sneakers and what really made you a sneakerhead. So I guess Cheats, we'll start off with you here.
Man, what started it all for me probably was, to be honest, it was probably hoops. So in the 90s, I graduated high school in 96. So through that kind of period of hoops and athletics, in particular, not exclusively, but in particular, Nike would have, obviously they had Jordan, but if you even go, they had Bo Jackson and they had Deion Sanders, and all of my friends were athletes. I mean, like, we were all trying to be, whether it was Griffey, we were trying to do something with athletics and sneakers. And that's really where it started. I wasn't into the lifestyle turn is a little bit later, like the passion for the lifestyle turn. The passion for us, kind of trying to figure out is, can we get those new whatever athlete, you know what I mean, was really hitting. And I remember the first time I was able, like there's a place in Richmond called Richmond Sports. If you're in the West End of Richmond, or I think there was one on South Side as well. So I was an employee in '96 at Richmond Sports, and so we had our employee discount. And I remember the first time getting something that I felt really turned heads were the all white Penny Hardaways. They had to be 95, 96. It wasn't the very first iteration of the penny, but it was the all white with the blue swoosh. And I just remember the feeling I had being able to buy the pennies with my own money, going to school, and having everybody be like, "Yo, where did you get those?" And that title of the famous Babito Garcia book, the Cool Ball Love book, is like, "Yo, where did you get those?" It was the first time I really noticed that sneakers was going to be something that was going to be with me for a real long time. Now, again, from that time to now, there's been all these twists and turns. There's different iterations of how a person that's passionate about sneakers even goes about their business. Fell out of love with sneakers for a while as well. Get back into it in many ways, but it really was connected to the '90s and those athletes that were connected to these shoes. And like I said, Nike was kind of the flagship, but it wasn't just Nike. I mean, Reebok Pump had Shaq. I just remember the athletes that were connected to the sneakers. So that's where the passion started.
Awesome. Yeah, you definitely brought me back with Griffey and Penny Hardaway and Shaq. Forgot about all those shoes, but they're coming back. Saw those freshwater Griffeys a couple weeks ago. So
tough.
Kevin, do you want to go next with kind of your background?
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep it short and sweet.
Cool.
I am originally born and raised Washington, D.C. I'm here now, uptown D.C. And unfortunately, during the 80s, I guess it's known worldwide with all the documentaries and so forth, what went on in the city between 84 and 88 with Reaganomics, the explosion of the crack era and so forth. And I unfortunately had to watch those movies and those documentaries because I lived it. And one thing that did come out of that were the apparel that a lot of my uncles and their colleagues and so forth were wearing. And that's where it stems from. And it wasn't necessarily like now you had to wear a certain brand, because whatever you wore was just clean. So I'm from an era where no matter if you're wearing Fila or British Nikes or Etonics or Nike or Adidas, like as long as you were clean, you were fly. And that's kind of what I represent and where it came from. And then all my family were athletes. My aunt played basketball and so forth. And that's where it kind of stemmed from. And the one shoe, although I was a Knicks fan, the one shoe that really sparked for me was the original Air Jordan 6, the infrared. And that's when sneaker became art to me, because me being anti-Chicago, anti-Mike, waiting for the Knicks to knock these dudes off. But seeing that shoe and those two holes in that tongue, and I was like, what is that? And I was at VCU from 98 to 2004. And to me, that was the true implosion of the retro. So having the opportunity to honestly, with my own hard-earned money, legally obtain the shoes that I was unable to, obtain because I couldn't afford them and so forth back when I was a kid. My time at VCU was just all about that. So that's where it started for me. But the athletic thing started with, unfortunately, the hustlers in the streets and my relatives who were all athletes. So like Cheek said, as far as, what people wore on the court, you went to the playground, you were fresh. You didn't go with your beat up shoes. Oh, you're going to beat them up on the court. Like that's the era I came from. Dudes wore something once and literally you see them leaving the playground, throwing it away or giving it to a kid. Now go and buy something else on Georgia Avenue or New Hampshire or PG Plaza, the next day. So that's the era I'm from. So that's where all that came from, man. Just being clean. And from that point on, man, it's just been a tolerated thing with me. And I won't call it an addiction. I would just say that I've learned how to cater to my habit, to say the very least. Now things have been retro 4 or 5, 6 times, and I still have the original ones from 2000 that still look good. So I don't have to sit there and pay for so much money with retail going up and demand going up. But it's obviously, to me, it's amazing to see the explosion of things and how people's identity are now incorporated and infused in sneakers. It's very, very bizarre to me now more than ever, but I'm an old head, so I'm still trying to figure it out.
I like it. Warren, we got two Knicks fans. You're up in New York City. I don't know where your allegiances lie, but what kind of made you fall in love with sneakers?
Wow, no allegiances, just to answer that first question. But I think, I was late to the party, truthfully, Parks. I only began to really pay attention to sneakers once the fashion industry started essentially being casualized. Like I recognized probably as early as maybe 10 years ago, there was so much novelty around sneakers and really this play between what we considered like dressing up and then also this idea of casualization, right? And so I remember the first time that I saw a guy with a pair of trousers on and a pair of sneakers, and I thought, okay, let's ingest that a little bit. And so it took me a long time to actually wrap my head around it truthfully. And so I started off, pretty late to the party and quickly recognized really the value and importance of a good sneaker arsenal. New York City, the streets are, they're hard on a nice pair of shoes. And so as someone who for the longest time has equated so much value with a beautiful pair of hard shoes, I never necessarily understood sneakers, the hype around sneakers with, price points, upwards of $500, $1,000. And so 10 years ago is when I first started to understand and then also start exploring myself, right? I started off very small. My first pair of sneakers, I guess, really were common projects, clean, easy, simple, low profile. And for me, it won. And they won me over, truthfully, because it gave me this ability to essentially take all of that wardrobe that I existed in daily, whether it was trousers, different iterations of trousers, full length, cropped, et cetera, et cetera. Those were the easiest pair of sneakers to actually incorporate into my wardrobe at that point. Listen, things came along after that. The dad shoe, Nike, their massive push with respect to collaborations on the high end. And so for me, it quickly became an obsession. And so I find that I still love a beautiful shoe today, but I can tell you that they now, sneakers and beautiful shoes kind of have the same value for me at this point. Still super curated for me based on everything, closet space, energy, effort, etc. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think just the past year that we've been in and being in a pandemic has kind of sped up the direct to consumer market that we see around the sneaker industry. So what I mean by that is that a super popular app that we all have on our phone, I'm sure, is the Nike SNKRs app. You either hate it or you love it. It's paralyzing when you're trying to get through. I'd much rather do a draw than trying to get my credit card number through. And then we're seeing some traditional brick and mortar stores like a Finish Line making their own apps and doing their own draws. So Warren, I think I'm going to stick with you first, and just if you could kind of touch on the business background and how the industry in general is kind of switching to this direct to consumer and what that means in your line of work, I think that would be great.
Great question, Parks. I think exactly as you mentioned, the pandemic has shined a light on so many different things. And I think the biggest thing that it's shined a light on for every single brand with any sort of skin in the game is profitability. And I think it's profitability and also brand identity. I think, one of the things that, it would be wrong for me not to acknowledge is, especially for a brand like a Nike, with having all of these channels, ultimately, one of the things that you realize as you continue to grow, evolve, expand, and even open up another brick and mortar or another website or another small kind of like niche mom and pop shop that you feel like has a good eye or a good curated point of view. Like the reality is that from a brand's perspective, there's only so much of that identity and profitability that you can control. And so one of the things that people have recognized and major brands, again, with any kind of skin in the game, is that the quickest way to profit is to manage all of that yourself, right? And so I think, best example would be, Nike, the sneakers app. The sneakers app hasn't been around that long, but listen, Parks, you experience that minutia around trying to check out. I experienced that minutia around trying to check out, and there's for certain a number of other people that are experiencing that same drama with respect to checkout, right? And so Nike has, consciously and very, very strategically decided that all of their energy and their efforts moving forward is going to be, on the channels that they can manage, the channels that they can own, the channels that they can drive, and ultimately that's, it's about profitability and it's about brand identity. And I think, there's so many other brands doing equal work on that footing. Adidas, Reebok, New Balance. No one necessarily is exempt from this conversation.
Cheats is back in a different corner. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm seem to have some internet issues. Is, like we said, a very 2021 thing to say. But go ahead, Kevin. I'll catch up after you.
Kevin, how do you feel about kind of the direct-to-consumer market? Do you like the apps, or would you rather be, camping outside for a store or relying on a hookup? Where do you kind of lie with the kind of, I guess, modernization of how we're getting these shoes to us?
Gotcha. For the sake of time, there are about 5 or 6 angles, but I would just take 2 angles. One was disappointing to me is that it's really squeezing out what I grew up on, which were the legitimate mom and pops. So I recall going on Broad Street, 200 block, going to Footwork, going to Henry, going to even Frederick, Maryland, for example, and so forth, and these stores who had legitimate accounts and so forth, and seeing these guys really have a passion for what they did, but it being business, but being legitimate business, now being converted into, now with the millions of dollars on the black market alone, where it's best to just have a quote unquote buy, sell, trade shop, as opposed to having an official legitimate account in store. So I'm disappointed in that, because I really think that a lot of people, particularly minorities, really got squeezed out. I'm talking about people that had shops for 20, 30, 40 years that were staples in their cities. But with that being said, it's business. And I think what Warren talked about before we got on was that this is smart business for a lot of companies, particularly Nike, Adidas, and so forth. But it also has its own issues. So when you have literally 800,000 people on one server, there's not a server that's going to be able to be too fair with that. And that's the issues that come about. So it has its issues, but also has its advantages. And I'm just one of those people that I enjoy the interaction and relationships with folks. So I did not mind going to a store, not necessarily just camping out or being in line, but I even tell the guys that I mentor that even with everything going technology and so forth, your interview and face-to-face interaction is going to get you your advancement still in life. So this right here, how you communicate face-to-face, eye contact, so forth, all that still counts. And I think it still counts for the sneaker game. I think we're in a spot now in which people are desensitized to how to communicate, how to socialize, how to network. And so they don't know how to act when an app blows up and they have to actually go outside and go to a store and talk to a manager. They don't know how. So I think those things, as far as even the communication and how to be social and how to network and so forth, I think that's lost in the direct consumer type of model. So I think there's a way for you to have balance. But right now, again, the consumer is making the demands, and so are these high companies. So a lot is being driven the wrong way. But like with everything, it's a cycle. And I'm looking forward to the world kind of getting back to normal, in which there's could be some normalcy, because right now everything is on one end right now. And things are going to pan out soon after this pandemic. I'm quite sure of it. So seeing a few stores now open up and get back to things. But now getting an account with Nike or Adidas or Reebok now is impossible, because they've squeezed the mom and pop out. And again, my frustration with that is that most mom and pops were owned by people of color, no question. So that's my real issue with that.
Do you think, and Cheats, I'd love to get your take on this too. The biggest sneaker story that's made news this year was the Nike executive Ann Hebert, I think her name is Hebert, who lost her job. Essentially, her son, it sounds like, was backdooring a lot of shoes and selling them. And from whatever you read, he either made $40,000 or $2 million, somewhere within that range. And it seems like that actually took some heat off of Marcus Jordan, because he was kind of getting some similar things just for one of the releases earlier this year. Do you think a light being shown on that, as people using bots and things like that, maybe in the pandemic ending, might bring things back to the traditional mom and pop stores and make things maybe level the playing ground a little bit?
Can I just say, that's a good question. Can I just go back for just one thing to piggyback off what Kevin was saying? Only because with what seems to be kind of what's the best way to say it? It was almost like an inevitable kind of turn, what we saw with the apps and the direct to consumer. And Kevin actually hits a point that is just almost just what followed what happens with people and what happens with culture. And I'm going to sound like an older head than I am when I say, like, people don't really communicate in the form of community like they used to. And so one of the challenges with some of the stuff that happens, and you've seen it throughout a lot of communities and culture, is that it's less driven by that community and much more driven by like hype, for lack of a better word. So when you're talking about what we were missing back in the days, or not that long ago, but when you look at it in particular, what we were missing with people waiting in line and people talking to minority owned mom and pop stores that you were getting, with, you're missing that community in a sense, and that in-depth knowledge, which now it's all being replaced throughout society. You can talk sneakers, but you can talk hip hop, you can talk fashion, you can talk a lot of things. It's being replaced by a lot more access and a lot more ability to get things, but without that level of understanding, that level of personal, interaction, that level of community. So just hearing Kevin talk about it, even to where we are in 2021, it was different 10 years ago. It just was. And some of that stuff does get recreated in a sense when you talk about some of the reseller stores and the trade stores, because people that really love sneakers are ultimately going to end up there in one way or the other, and you're going to meet the owners and you're going to talk about it. But it is different. Not having those accounts, it's just a different scenario. When you talk about kind of the news stories that are making news now, and almost I mean, my site is big into hip hop culture and independent hip hop and that stuff, and it's tied to the sneaker game in some ways. Like athletics is tied to the sneaker game in some ways. The interesting thing about some of the stories you hear now, I almost look at them like I look at the press back in the day, like when we talk about hip hop or in the early days of kind of the middle heights of hip hop growth, is like you don't really get stories unless they're bad stories, right? Right. Those stories that make the national news are stories like you were saying with the Nike executive. I just think it's almost inevitable, and I almost think that it's almost natural when you get this level of access, this level of hype, and this level of money that's involved. They're all.
Do you think it's greed though, Cheats?
Absolutely, but what was a lot of this stuff that's driven is it's always greed, right? Like it's always money. There's always something in the bottom line, and so it's obviously not a good story in regards to what happened with Nike in general. It's not a good story in the current climate. But I'm almost trying to figure out, like, if it wasn't that Nike executive with her kid, it was gonna be. It was just almost the inevitable course of the way these things go, and it's interesting that makes news. The trophy room story is a little bit different. That's the Jeffrey Jordan story, and I think that's a modern day frustration in regards to some of the stuff that I see with sneaker access in general, and I think I see it across the board. But I'll stop there and let other folks go.
That's great. I appreciate it. Warren, when we're kind of talking about what we're seeing from, I guess, modern sneakers from a fashion perspective, like maybe where we're going, Nike seems to lean a lot on nostalgia with like Jordan 1s and Dunks. You see a lot of those, and they go quickly on that sneakers app for sure. They also partner with a lot of local skate shops. They partner with a lot of international brands. They partner with celebrities like Travis Scott. And we're seeing that too from Adidas, but it seems like very two different concepts where one company's leaning a lot on nostalgia, whereas Adidas coming out with shoes that I don't think we've ever seen before. It's kind of a what are those moment when they come out. Where do you see this going, these two companies? And I know there's plenty of other companies as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, we've got to recognize that the brands are very different ultimately, right? I think, Nike is a brand that was built on legacy, was built on nostalgia, was built on this idea of franchises. So when you talk about, Jordan is a franchise. When you talk about, Air Max is a franchise. When you talk about all these specific shoes, right, these are actually franchises. And so Adidas, unfortunately, they don't necessarily stack up the same way, right? We're talking about, two companies that are in the same industry, but ultimately the foundation of those companies very, very slightly, right? I think with Nike having so much legacy and so much history, their approach at this point, it's a multi-pronged strategy, right? They're looking at, franchises. They're looking at franchises through the lens of partnerships, collaborations. They're looking at, all of these different things also from pricing tiers, right? Let's talk about, Jordan 1 as a tier. Let's talk about, Jordan and Off-White as a tier. So I think that Nike is looking at all of these things through a very different lens than Adidas. And I think Adidas is, they're playing catch up right now, right? I think that, Kanye West and this whole Yeezy moment has allowed them to accelerate themselves at a much faster rate than they would have without him. But I think, again, they're playing catch up. And so they're doing the work that Nike ultimately has already done from a franchise standpoint, but still their strategy is no different, right? They're looking at things through exactly that same lens, whether it's, what franchises today that do we have that are actually successful, what's not successful, how do we put those franchises through the lens of, everything from pricing, evolution, collaboration, strategic partnerships, et cetera. So they're just different brands, but ultimately operating kind of in the same space.
Sure. Kevin and Cheats, we were talking kind of leading up to the event here. You guys were kind of going back and forth about the sneaker scene in Richmond over the years. Mm-hmm. How interwoven is the sneaker community and culture into the cultural fabric of Richmond? Really beyond that, with Warren being in New York City, or really all of us now from a national perspective. I would just love for y'all to talk the way you were talking before we hopped about how the sneaker scene popped up in Richmond and how it's changed, grown, adapted over the years.
Well, Parks, I can tell you, it was not weird or strange or bizarre for me to be with my uncles. I'm talking about this maybe 1991, getting in his Chevrolet Trailblazer and going from downtown F Street and driving to Broad Street in Red Richmond, straight down 95, because it's a release that was missed and it was right there. So I want to shout out the stores that really set the foundation in Richmond. Footwork, Henry, Hospitality, Dominion. These are stores that were in Richmond during the early 2000s that set the foundation for what you see now. And Richmond has always been, I hate to say a creep spot or a hub, but it still is to this day, even with all the hype and stuff going on. You have people that will drive from New York, from DC, from the Carolinas, and will come to Richmond because a DTLR or a Shoe City or a store will still be sitting on stuff. And if it's hitting gems all the time, and this is before or even concerned with backdooring or anything shady going on at all. So since I was a kid, Richmond was always a spot. And to be quite frank with you, so was Baltimore. So it was not weird for me to be on 295 coming from downtown DC, because it would be 4 or 5 spots in Baltimore that will still have a Jordan release or a Griffey release or something in the 90s. That was what I grew up with. So just hopping in the backseat in that Trailblazer and going to get a shoe was what I grew up on. So even now seeing what's going on in Richmond, I think that a lot of people who may be younger, probably even not born at that time, need to understand that VCU and that downtown area, South Side, North Side, there's certain spots that Richmond always had. People just kind of kept quiet about it. And even with the evolution of social media, Richmond's blowing up a little bit now because people are just talking, but there's still some hidden gems in Richmond, even as I speak right now. But people are just so on what's hot. And as Rachid said, what's hype right now, they kind of just forget about things going to cycle. So things that are sitting right now, trust me, in the next 12 to 24 months, people are going to want that kind of stuff. So people who are kind of in the game and know it, and they're in it just for the passion, not just for what's hot and what's not. Trust me, dunks were dead the past 3 years, dude. Like dunks were dead. Like there was a post everywhere on Soul Collector, on Nike Talk. Dunks are dead. Why are you buying dunks? The same De La lows that you're getting now for $250, they were sitting at the Williamsburg Premium Outlet for $49.99. They had 89 pair there untouched. They went down to 29 before they sold 2 years ago. So this shows you, like you was talking about, how Travis Scott, if someone comes up and it just explodes, and something that I paid $35 for and worn every bit of probably 19, 20 times, someone's buying them off my feet for $250. It's just, it's unreal to me. In Richmond, unreal. But that just shows you. But Richmond also, as far as most cities, it's a tri-city, but it's evolving. So going to VCU in 98, we knew certain parts on Broad Street, you did not cross, outside of campus, off campus, if you will. But now with what's going on, it's a part of gentrification. Brooklyn's going through it as well. And I think it's all just culturally speaking, from a whole standpoint, how things is changing overall. But Richmond is definitely a hub, especially for my guys from Virginia Beach. Don't get it twisted. Folks at 757 would tell you they would drive up to Dominion to come get our skate shoes. And I say our because I lived in Richmond for 20 years, and eat up our skate shoes because they have a chance in their own towns in Virginia Beach and Norfolk and so forth. So Richmond has always been known as a hub to come get stuff from out of towners when they couldn't get it from their own spots.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Kevin says. I think it wasn't as talked about. Every shop that he mentioned, I knew, but I didn't know them I didn't hold them in the value and the esteem that I feel like I would hold them today. So from Henry to Hospitality to me, I was in all of them, but it wasn't like at the time, you were kind of just living it and you didn't really, you feel it. Now, a little bit beyond earlier in that, it was nothing for us to get in 95. Like I said, go up by 95, stop in DC, stop in Philly, looking for stuff that other people didn't have. And now just the interesting thing about Richmond, and you got to give credit where credit is due in regards to the popularity of round two and what they were able to create and do. I remember going to trade shows in different places, trade shows in the Campbell and places like that, was really trying to bring on that kind of that in-between wave of what Kevin was talking about to when round two opened up. There was this in-between wave period that a lot of VCU students had to go to different independent trade shows and independent, they would set up pop shops and restaurants and things of that nature. And that's where I really first started seeing, that VCU community and those folks that were tied in really come out, either set up, they were selling stuff out of their own collections. And then obviously you saw the advent of round two and everything that spun off of that. So now you go and you got, whether it's Monumental or Rotate or, you've got all the kind of retailer shows. I worked at a place, I did blog and content for a place called West Coast Kicks that was on Broad Street a little bit after the period that Kevin was talking about. And then Need Supply had all the contracts there as well. So the interesting thing I think about Richmond in general and sneaker culture and the fabric is that kind of like we're seeing with the evolution of everything, it's gotten more accessible, it's gotten widened. I think that hardcore community, the ones that would have been there no matter what, are still there. I think they still find Richmond a really attractive and appealing community. But it is, I think it's like everything else, it's increased with a lot of casual, maybe folks that just have access, that may be looking for something because they saw it on an internet. I think that always the struggle has always been taste versus what other people tell you what's hot. And the sneaker collector and the sneaker kind of head and the sneaker person that's like, yo, I'm gonna get this because I like it, is a different. They always rise to the top. Like, I don't care what the world tells me, this is hot, I'm gonna put it on, I'm gonna do something with it. It always, you can tell who those collectors are versus the ones that are, oh, Nike app, sneaker app just told me I should buy this at 10 o'clock on Friday, so I'm gonna buy it. And I think hopefully when you talk about evolution and cyclical and things that come back around, that part of it, that part of the style, that part of the unique individualism of fashion and sneakers and so forth, I think that part is the part that I hope comes back in full force, where, it's not just what, an app tells you what's dropping that we have to get. It's, oh no, this is what I really wanna kind of rock and show off to my friends and so forth. I don't know if we're gonna ever get back to that, but we'll see. We'll see.
Time will tell. For everybody watching, feel free to use the Q&A as we're kind of getting to the end here. And if you want to ask the panelists any questions, I know the chat's been busy, but pop on over to the Q&A of your screen if you're interested in that. Warren, what's your perspective on kind of the same question, maybe being in New York City, slightly bigger than Richmond, but is there still maybe more of a community feel there? Or I saw you talking about marketing cycles too. What's old is new, what's new is old, I guess, and how that kind of works from your industry angle as well.
Yeah, I mean, what's old is new, what's new is old. And I think that ultimately, like, we have to recognize that, everything can't be humming at the same exact time. And everything doesn't necessarily deserve the same energy, like a Jordan franchise, right? And so I think it's unfortunately indicative of the marketing cycle and the budget associated with marketing. But I think I guess back to your earlier point of community, I think that yeah, we're a slightly bigger market, I'll say, and I think that essence of community still exists, right? I remember, gosh, maybe a year ago at this point, and it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't after a new release, I was after some new running shoes, but I went down to Nike Town on 57th, and there was a kid, I think he was 11, him and his buddy, had just gotten dropped off by someone's dad or whatever. They were camped out in line, and literally he looked back at me and he's like, what are you grabbing today? I'm like, oh dude, just some running shoes. And he's like, oh, I thought you were here for, he was like, oh, I thought based on what you had on, I thought you were here for, I forget exactly what the shoe was that was being released. I was like, nah, not exactly. And so I struck up a conversation with him. 12, entrepreneur, ultimately. Him and his buddy were buying shoes that ultimately they could go back to Long Island and actually sell, to their respective friends, their schools, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know. I thought that was super cool, like a young entrepreneur. But I think that level of community still exists, right? It's slightly different, obviously, through the lens of this pandemic, which I think that, again, no vertical is excluded from that sense of community, right? I think it's just different now. You know what I mean? I think that the releases are still popular. You can still see people, lining up. You still see people who are driven by this idea of the transaction, right? And wanting kind of that, physical in-person like transaction versus, the people who are like, oh, I'm just going to stay home and try my hand with the app. You know what I mean? So it still exists. It's just different. And maybe slightly strained based on the pandemic, right? But it's still around. It's still out there. But I think here's the other thing I would also argue, right? Community is different. And when I say community is different, again, through this lens of pandemic, community exists in so many different ways, right? And I think I saw a question from someone in the chat box with respect to, like, does this, newfound energy around direct to consumer, and the direct to consumer model, will it squeeze out kind of mom and pop shops forever? I don't think so. And I think that's where community comes into play, right? I think all of these relationships need to be reimagined, right? And reimagined through the lens of, what are some of the things that are important for brands today, and how do some of these mom and pops actually play into whatever those important things are. And it's no different from, shucks, kids on the street buying sneakers, for their friends back in school, right? 3 friends said they wanted a pair, grabbed me a pair in an 8, a 10, and maybe an 11. We all have to rethink about what community looks like, at this moment. And I think that the quicker and the faster that we can get there, it will start to then even unlock more opportunity.
Awesome. I'm loving what's going on in the chat. I think we need to start a new alumni group, like VCU Sneakerheads or something, because there's already a community that exists. So maybe we can keep that going. We have a couple from a few questions from the Q&A. So if you guys have any more questions, leave them in the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen. I think you know this guy, Kevin, friend of the program, Mike Smart. He says, can we quickly touch on the rise of designer sneakers? Does anyone want to take that one?
Again, with me, it's not a rise, because again, my background is a little bit different. Like everything from Gucci to Ferragamo to so forth. I mean, as a kid, that's what I saw and grew up on. So again, I think that unfortunately, you're dealing with a generation who lacks or hasn't been taught how to have their own identity. So their identity is on what they see, what they see other people see, what they want to be like. So for example, if Mike and I are together, he looks at me and says, why are you wearing those? If I was a part of this new generation, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I would take them off and put on something that Mike want me to put on because I want to make sure I'm hit with him. My generation is like, I'm wearing it because I think it's fresh, I think it's cool, and I like it. So forget what your opinion is. And that's now lost. So I think the rise of designer sneaker is another way for folks to be different or distinctive, because now with everyone wanting to be limited and look exclusive, now that's becoming a majority. So it's like, how are you limited when you're now the majority? So everyone is now wearing this sneaker that's limited, everyone. So it's not limited no more, and it's the majority. So how can you differentiate yourself? And I think that the rise of the sneaker, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how much it costs, that's absolutely ridiculous right now. I think that's what's going on, where people are looking at a way to get even more distinctive, a little bit more exclusive than what's going on now. So it's trying to raise that bar. And the bar's gotten ridiculous, if you ask me. Some of those Versace shoes, I'm sorry. Ugly is ugly. Like, no disrespect. But I'm not paying $1,200 $200 for that. I can't. I'll go to, I'll go to Walmart and chill with a Walmart shoe before. I'm caught dead in some of them shoes that I see that are highly designer shoes. But the bulkiness and all of that, it's all about prestige. So with me, as we all know from us being guys, I'm sorry, no respect to nobody. And, I hope Range Rover's not listening to this, but the Range Rover truck is the worst once it gets 50K miles. But the stature and the status of having a Range Rover truck still does not eliminate the fact that the truck does not last past 50,000 miles. It just doesn't. So again, I think just having that stature and that status is what's prioritized, as opposed to you liking it or the design or it having any kind of like cheats of what Warren talked about. Just having that story behind, I met this person, I did stand in line, having that story behind your purchase, that's not what's prioritized anymore. It's about just doing it for the gram, doing it for the book. And I'm not part of that culture at all.
I hear you.
I wonder, and Warren probably is a good person to ask this, when you talk about designer sneakers and those types of things and what's happening with those today, because of access, right? Because of direct to consumer, because everybody can go on, whether it's GOAT or StockX, and find something that they wouldn't have normally been able to find. Does that make it, does it make the exclusivity based off price point? So now we're looking at, like, the thing that stood out to me is that, I don't know if everybody followed, but during the inauguration, the brother that had the Dior Jordans turned out to be a story everywhere that he had the Dior Jordans on because he had the Dior Jordans. and it was because like they're priced ridiculously. So it was like the only way now Where in the past it was like people could go out, like you had to go out and hunt and find and so forth. It seems like the only way to really be exclusive now is just to be able to afford to pay for it. And I don't know where your take is on it, but I think some of the designer stuff that you're talking about in the designer houses, it's all just linked to exclusivity based off price. So somebody can say, I have them because I can afford it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's exclusivity based on price and access, right? I mean, listen, I would be lying if I told you I'm still not salivating over those Dior Jordans. Now, listen, where am I?
They are a beautiful shoe. They're a beautiful shoe. Don't get me wrong.
But if that shoe was the same colorway sitting in DTLR right now, they'll be on sale for $89.99 right now if they were general release.
Hey, it's different. It's like I said, exclusivity based on price as well as access, right? And I think that that access is still limited, right? I think, listen, if you've got a plug, you've got the plug, great for you. But I think it's also ultimately, when I think about some of these fashion houses and kind of the tippy tier of what a price point looks like, when I also think about, how many of those shoes actually were even made for production, ultimately, that Dior Jordan was only filling a small segment of the marketplace anyway, right? And ultimately that small segment of the marketplace, was associated with a clientele that, on average spends X amount of dollars at Dior, annually, right? First and foremost, after you move and comb through that clientele list, if there's some people that potentially trickled into that list or trickled into, the purchase pattern, sheer luck ultimately, right? But it was a marketing play ultimately, right? It wasn't necessarily done to move this like proverbial needle. It ultimately was a marketing play, and it played to exclusivity and access.
So we have a couple more questions coming in here. Brandon Reed asked, how do you guys feel about the resale community cutting in front of those that actually want the shoes?
I have no problem as long as the person that you are feeding know what they're doing, know what they're getting into, and it is a fair, honest, and I would say integral deal. There's a young lady who has a son. I didn't get her name, but her concern is about the variants and the fakes, and that's a whole nother topic. We have a whole nother discussion with that alone. And I guess during meat, cheats, and worn days, it was easy to see what came from a flea market. Now, the quality of these shoes, you got to almost be a shoe scientist, if you will, to see what's real and what's fake. So unfortunately, you have a lot of people who have their sons and their daughters getting taken for money, not knowing that the product is not authenticated or not authentic at all. And I think that's the issue with the reselling. And a lot of times you deal with stores that the fakes are so good that somebody got to return to their store and be like, this is fake, this is why. And it's like, oh my gosh, like how could this be fake? And it goes to the point that it was one Jordan I remember that one of my colleagues had, that was the off-white Carolina one. And he literally had to weigh the shoe to see which one was fake. And one was 0.3 ounces, I think, lighter than the other because it was that good. So that's my only issue, is that a lot of people get taken knowingly or unknowingly because the infiltration now of fakes and variants now, it's an issue now within the community because the quality of the shoes with Nike and Adidas are going down because they are all about their price points. So they will make sure to use the cheapest materials to make sure they profit. So as the quality goes down on the shoes that are really real, the quality of fakes are going up. So the balance is now this, as opposed to when Warren, Cheats, myself were growing up, the quality of a Jordan 3 or a Jordan 6 was so great in which the fake makers was going to invest the type of money because they knew the way to get that much in advance. So as quality has gone down, fakes have gone up, and now it's even the playing field in a very meticulous and methodical, but just a way that makes the game just horrible in many aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that for resellers, like the important thing, and I've seen it, you know, the real, StockX, like the important thing is them continuing to invest in what we call authentication or authenticity, right? You know, for those guys, you know, they've got teams spread all across the country, you know, specifically devoted to authentication, right? So, you know, if I'm offloading, you know, a Balenciaga Triple S that I've never necessarily worn, you know, there's a massive process associated with essentially, you know, getting that shoe for sale, and it's back end, it's authentication. So I think that brands need to continue to do that work. And I think, unfortunately, there's some brands or platforms or services that aren't necessarily interested in participating in that space, right? And so I think that that's one thing to actually be clear on. If you are, you know, decidedly purchasing from, you know, a StockX or RealReal, et cetera, I don't necessarily think fakes come into play. I don't think you have to worry about, you know, is this a viable product? I think the question really comes down to, are you willing to pay the price? But I think once you start looking at some of these alternative sites, I don't know any off the top of my head, but alternative sites that don't necessarily put emphasis around authentication, that's where we've actually got to be concerned. Is it a fake? Is it not a fake? You know, who's the shoe? Who's the seller? Where is it coming from? How long is it going to take me to get it?
I mean, like I think most people, I struggle with the whole thing, but I don't struggle from the aspect of the reseller. I don't fault the reseller, and I don't fault the StockX's of the world. I do struggle with the companies, the parent companies, and their distribution, and because, believe it, I mean, it's kind of like the NBA waving at the NCAA. Well, the NBA sets the rules, right? Like if you're really mad at one and done, the NBA can allow high school kids to go right in. That's what they can do. And so if, you know, the Nikes and the Adidases and the Pumas of the world were really, really mad at the reseller, they would release more shoes. And so I get my anger, especially on certain aspects, is I'll get mad at, and I've learned as I've gotten older that even Kanye himself, maybe now with his new deals or his restructures, they've changed, but Kanye didn't determine how many Nike Yeezys were made. You know, he didn't determine. And when he said, I want to release more and make them wider, they were underwater immediately. And Adidas was like, nope, Kanye, we can't put that many out on the street because we can't have them on the resale market selling less than we're selling them in the Adidas store. And they have to go. So I always struggle with that because, like everyone else, I want to be able to find a balance. But those parent companies, they feed the resale market. Yep. They need the hype. Yep. And if Jerry Lorenzo or somebody released a Fear of God like they released an Air Max 90, you know what I mean? If they did it in the same numbers of the way that they release those shoes, they would technically not be as hype. Like the human nature would say, oh, everybody has these shoes, they're less valuable. And so I struggle with that part of the industry, and I don't know exactly how you solve that because, again, the person could be pounding on the designer, could be pounding on the company and say, release more shoes. Nobody can get them, and this is not my intention. And the company says, well, one, we're not going to do that. Or if we did that, they wouldn't be the story. They wouldn't be the value that they are now. So I don't struggle from the aspect of blaming the reseller, but I don't know how you find that balance with the parent company because human nature says, you know, the more pairs that are released, the less valuable it is because the more people have access to it. So it actually really does go down back to what we were kind of talking about originally, is how do we foster a community and a culture I like that because it's dope. Right? Like I like that, and I'm able to flip it like the
Cheeks. That's so 90s though. Like that's 90s hip hop right there. I mean, you might as well go ahead and put on your Gangstar and Wu-Tang.
And the creativity too. But what that did though is it also allowed for creativity amongst the owner of the product. Right now, you're almost afraid to touch a You know what I mean? You're almost afraid to touch and change something because then people will like say, "Oh, it's fake, it's not real." But in actuality, you made it your own style. You made this your own style, and I don't know if we value that as much now. You know?
Thank God
We
for the
have-
90s.
Sorry, Kevin.
No, I said thank God for the 90s.
What we said, what's old is new, and maybe it'll come back. With the few minutes we have left, a couple of quick hitters. You guys can pick one of these to answer, 2 or 3, whatever you guys want to do. We have a question from Cassandra Willis. What kind of advice would you give someone just starting out in the sneaker game? And also, if you guys want to touch on maybe your favorite, a shoe you're really looking forward to coming out in the next year, or maybe your favorite non-hype shoe. So those are 3 questions that we've got. We can go around the room there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be quick because we only got 4 minutes left. To the young lady that asked that, I know the saying with one of the commercials, stay thirsty, my friends. My slogan is stay mindful. So be smart, but you have something that I don't have, and that's female intuition. If something feels wrong, stay away from it. Usually if a deal is too good, 9 times out of 10, it usually is. So that's the key thing. I'm not going to drop because I know my source would kill me, but I think things are going to leak within the next 4 weeks. Nike is going to drop a few bombs in the 4th quarter, particularly on the phone posit line. OGs I'm really looking forward to. So as far as where my money will be going, the 4th quarter with Nike, they already got me strapped. So those leaks will be coming out probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Nice. Cheech, you want to go?
Yeah, no, I'll just say, like we were just talking about, be authentic, man. Be in the sense of find the pairs that you like for whatever reason, irregardless of brand, irregardless of price point. Find what you think is fresh and make it even fresher. Because again, that's what ultimately stands out is this person and whatever they're rocking, how they're going to carry that product and how they're going to do it, and be confident and authentic in it. I'm really interested to see 2 things that happen. I think 2 years ago, you saw Puma really make a run with signing a bunch of young rookie basketball contracts. And they've made some moves with some contracts on the court. They made some moves with the Clydes, and players that are wearing Clyde. And I'm really interested to see what Puma does in the basketball space, only because basketball has the market share of just basketball excitement in sneaker products has gone down. They're signing less basketball players, exclusive deals, and those types of things. And I'm interested to see what happens with Puma. I'm actually interested to see what ultimately Jordan Brand does with Zion. Zion has got a bunch of kids saying they want to be like Zion that are on the court playing right now, just young kids in middle school age. I'm interested to see what happens with Zion and Jordan Brand, and I'm interested to see what Jerry Lorenzo does with Adidas and his Adidas deal. Like, I mean, that's just it's a no. He was a no miss at Nike, and the fact that he's over there with Adidas now and the way that they've gone about that, I'm interested to see what happens there.
I'm interested.
How you, Warren? Bring us.
I am interested to see that as well. I love everything that Jerry Lorenzo is doing right now, from Fear of God, Xenia, Essentials, to now Athletics. So I am hyper focused on that. I also have a good friend that works for Jerry at Adidas for Fear of God. I think that, I don't know. I mean, I guess my excitement is really around really just kind of the evolution of the industry, right? I can't tell you that I'm sitting here today following basketball stars. I'm not. And so my interest is pretty pure through the lens of what's hot, what looks good, what am I actually most excited about? And so I'm curious to see how some of these franchises that have been kind of on the rise the past few years are going to continue to evolve, and how each of these brands actually attack what newness looks like across each of these franchises. So that's super, super exciting. I'm also super excited to see and understand, and I think it's been like this buzzword for our entire conversation is, you know, how brands actually close the gap with respect to community, understanding that the direct to consumer channel is, you know, everyone's super focused on it right now, hyper focused, and it's kind of squeeze, whatever, out, you know, all of these different independents. I'm looking to understand, you know, over the next 12 to 18 months, you know, how each of these brands are actually going to foster community, because I think that it's something that's actually not being talked about or discussed. And I think that, yeah, it's missing from this equation for sure.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys. This was great. Like I said, I think we've started to foster our own little community here in the chat. We may need a part 2. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us, and everyone who joined us at home or work, wherever you are. Work, home, it's kind of the same thing now. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at VCU Alumni. We have a bunch of events and initiatives coming up, some really cool stuff around the 10-year anniversary of the Final Four team. So you can win some t-shirts there. We have a ton of events coming up next week, March 30th, Adulting 101. Next up, grad school. So if you're a recent grad and you're looking to explore grad school in your future, definitely check that out. April 1st, we have an alumni volunteer fair. So if you're interested in serving on the board with Warren or a chapter or just getting more involved with VCU, be sure to check that out. And April 7th, we have a collaboration with Garden Grove Brewery for National Beer Day. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Be sure to keep your eye on Instagram for that as well. You can just go to vcualumni.org to check out all the latest events, click on events in the calendar. Also, as always, if you're interested in supporting students and supporting the programming that you watch today, head to support.vcu.edu and you can do so philanthropically. So Cheats, Warren, Kevin, really appreciate this. This is a really fun conversation and looking forward to doing it again. So appreciate you guys.
Thanks, guys. Had a blast.
See y'all.